Welcome to Spread Love and Organizations, the healthcare leadership podcast where we explore leadership with purpose. I'm Naji, your host, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Pedro Coelho, founder and CEO of Biorce, an AI-native company transforming how clinical trials are designed, optimized, and executed. After years advising pharma and biotech companies as a strategy consultant in the life sciences sector, Pedro saw firsthand how inefficiencies in the clinical research process were slowing access to life-saving treatments. The consequences weren't just operational, they were human. Drugs were too expensive, timelines too long, and too many patients were left behind. In 2024, he founded Biorce to change that. Biorce, short for Biology's Force, is building the world's first true AI assistant for clinical trials. Pedro is passionate about the intersection of technology, data, and human impact, and believes AI has a central role to play in reshaping how treatments reach those who need them most. Pedro, it's such a pleasure to see you again and have you with me today.
Thank you, Naji. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to this discussion.
So, Pedro, I'll always start where I always do. If you can take us through your personal story and what led you to found one of the hottest AI native companies in clinical research these days.
Yeah, I think it dates back probably to an opportunity I had randomly in my career, which was a phase 3 asset that the biotech company was running in Europe that was not going very well, I guess, to say the least. And I came in as a consultant to try to understand what was going wrong in the study. And after a deep dive, we came up with like a bunch of different problems that we could see. But they all came down to, in other words, what I call lack of love in the trial. So I think the CRO that was running the trial was just not giving it enough love, to be very honest. So it was just like a slow, painful relationship between the sponsor and the CRO at that point. And then that led, long story short, for me to start the CRO to service the study. We rescued that study, brought it to a good place, and then many more studies after that, until eventually, I guess, what I call today the worst event, but equally the best thing that happened to my life happened, which was, and I'll explain what I mean by this, but my father got diagnosed with melanoma at the time. And then, I think, probably better than me, but I called melanoma the good guys of cancer, right? Usually it's like skin mark, you remove it, like out of all the cancers you can be diagnosed with, usually that's number one's preference is like, okay, if I had to be with one, at least make it melanoma because it's the easiest one, right? For many reasons, tumors tend to be easier to remove because obviously they are at skin level, like tends to not be the one that propagates the most and that kills the most people. So like overall, like I guess it's the best evil you can expect in that case. So equally me, I was like, that, don't worry, you'll be fine. Like melanoma is not that bad. And then I ate my words because 3 months later it was stage 4 and had propagated massively with metastases everywhere. And I was like, wow, like I had never seen something like this. The oncologist had never seen something like this. And then I really became obsessed about, I guess, melanoma, but more importantly, like looking for options that would hopefully save his life. And we found 2 studies that are looking at inhibitors that he was positive for, so BRAF and MEK inhibitors. And at the time, there was one study from Pfizer and one study from Novartis. And we managed to get, in a way, compassionate use for Pfizer's study at the time. And we managed to get him on the study. And all of this was like, within 2 weeks, we went from, okay, this is stage 4, super late stage, to, okay, compassionate use is here. Let's go and put the treatment ongoing, right? And then we had a huge remission. Like, when I say huge, like, if you remember, I'm sure you've seen many as well, PET scans of different patients. It went from Christmas tree to barely any metastasis left. So really, like, an improvement at the scale that even the same doctor that said we've never seen it this bad was also saying, I've never seen it recover this much, like unseen. But obviously the fear was that, like large molecules that inhibitors tend to be, they don't pass the encephalitic membrane on the brain. And that if it was too late because it would have gotten to the brain, then that would have been, I guess, unfortunately, in inverted commas, for nothing, right? Like we were extending the life, but not really fixing the root cause of the problem. And, my fears, unfortunately, were real. And eventually my father passed away due to the brain tumor that was propagated from melanoma originally. And that kind of like, I guess, put me in what I call an early life crisis, which was understanding that I did everything I could, right? Probably more than I would say most sons would be able to do. But equally, that if it was done a couple months earlier, or even a month earlier, we probably would have been avoiding the brain tumor propagation, which means he'd still be around with us, right? So it was like this bittersweet feeling of like, oh my God, we did so much and we extended his life 10 months. Equally not enough. And equally, I was in a place which has a CRO. Questionably, we don't have the aligned incentives to do things faster and better all the time. So I started falling out of love with my own company and understanding that I was part of the problem, in other words, not the solution. So at that point in time, I made a decision that, that was enough and that I was going to leave that business. Eventually, we ended up selling it to start something that would fix this problem that I see and that would help bringing these drugs to market faster. And I think we've all heard this for many years, this idea of bringing drugs to market faster. But thankfully, technology was also in a place. So somewhat my life story aligned with technology's story and allowed me to take this leap of the AI technology and use it, I guess, for the greater good and building the first operating system to manage clinical trials from scratch. So that's kind of like, long story short, well, not so short, but long story short, the whole story behind Biorce, really.
Oh, Pedro, thank you for sharing this story with me today and with all of us. As you describe this later part, your technology meeting your life purpose. So, as you said, a lot of talks obviously about AI. And then you look at clinical research, and certainly what you've experienced personally, millions of people are experiencing, and some even don't know that these things exist, or clinical research, and how we can help patients through clinical research. So you're really trying to fix with a hot topic, a hard problem, right? It's very hard to implement basically clinical development through AI. It's one of the hardest environments. So let me know how I'd love to know how you are thinking about it, and where do you believe AI can really create this immediate impact in clinical research?
So the way of thinking evolved as well, right? So maybe I'll take you down that journey, because I feel like if I only tell you how I think today, you'll be like, that's absolutely insanity, right? So maybe I'll take you down this path of evolution because it will be easier to understand. So at first, when I started Biorce, the idea was I've been to many protocols that had too many amendments and that needed those amendments in a way to get fixed, right? Because they were just fundamentally broken protocols. And that's why they were not performing, right? So, just for perspective, the CRO I had specialized on rescuing or doing complex studies, right? So we're not in the business of like a easy phase 1 study, right? We are in the complex phase 2, 3, even mainly phase 3 in complex diseases like cell and gene therapy or oncology. So fundamentally, I saw so many amendments that were a waste of time and money that could have been avoided in the first place if the sponsor had, I guess, had the right incentives in place, in other words. And with this came the idea that, hey, if we could develop algorithm at the time, we used to call it not a language model, right? This is the moment of infancy of language models. To detect these potential amendments, we could eventually train a model that would generate, so I guess what we were at the time calling generative AI, generate the response to that amendment, right? And in baseline or lane terms, the idea was upload a protocol, it will flag what's wrong and tell you how to fix it, right? This was the foundational idea for the company, right? That's where everything started from. with a dream, and I guess it was like almost unicorn rainbow type of dream, that we would eventually be able one day to train a model to generate a full clinical trial protocol. That was like, I mean, I can tell you today, our first ever round of investment, everyone was like, yeah, but if you do that, then that's great. But let's focus on this, right? Let's focus on what you really can do, because that's far-fetched. That's like a dream, right? You'll never get there. I mean, luckily we did. And within like a year and a couple months, we were launching the first protocol generation tool ever. And the first protocol AI generated to be ever submitted to the regulatory bodies were generated with Biorce's technology, right? So that was the foundation, right? But where are we today? It evolved from this idea of, I guess, a protocol amendment, detection, and generation tool to a full protocol generation tool to now what I believe to be an operating system, right? So from scratch, let's say you have an asset management platform that is helping you understand which assets you have. Are you targeting the right mechanisms of action, the right receptors, the right approach? And from there, economically speaking, so on a health economics perspective, does this make sense, right? If I have a molecule and I have, let's say, 5 different targets I could go with, which one makes most sense for me, whether that's a biotech company or a pharma, to target to it, right? Where do I have less competition? Where do I have more reimbursement? Where does economically make more sense for me to start with, rather than starting with the one I think works better, right? Which tends to be how, as you know, biotechs tend to do it early stage. And then from there, evolving to say, right, I can now go from this asset to spawning this study to start my actual drug development process. And that means looking at all methods of study design, whether that's a phase 1-2 and a phase 2-3, whether that's a phase 1, 2, and 3, whether I might need a phase 1, 2A, and 2B, and then a 3, or I can jump then from 2B to, straight market approval. How can you think about your studies and think about all the scenarios to simulate them and get the ones that have the maximum outcome, right? Usually for least investment possible and somewhat controlled risk, right? As you know, risk always goes up when you're trying to break some or cut some corners. And then from there, do the full study, right? So say, hey, this is now the study design I want to follow with this asset. Now I want to generate the protocol. From there, select my sites, simulate my protocol, understand where I am in terms of strength, in terms of Kaplan-Meier simulation, see all of this live in a platform, make the changes I need to make with my team to the protocol to make sure I have the best protocol. From there, select my hospitals. From there, then with a single click, go and say, okay, now that I have all these hospitals and I can see my feasibility simulation, trigger my contract negotiation and my budget negotiation and go live, right? That's where Biorce is already today. This vision of like a single operating system that allows you to manage your assets. And then further down, design and plan your studies all the way through to site activation as of today. And now we are going after the obvious next step, which is study execution, right? Which we are not there yet, but it's our natural next step.
I'd love to go in different pieces because I know you talk about it as it's an AI assistant for clinical trials. And as you were describing, I'm like, wow, okay, it can be an assistant actually to the different functions when I think of my teams, right? Like, so you started with protocol amendments. Like that's a huge problem already, right? Like usually you only start the trial for you to figure out what you need to amend based on the execution, and then you amend, but it's going to take whatever, like 3 to 6 months for it to be implemented. And you know the story, right? Like this is already a very big problem. So I'm hearing, like you can predict potential needs for amendment before you implement. Can you take us, like, if you take this one as an example, how do you do that? Like, how is this predictable? What database you're using for you to be able to predict the amendment needs, and how to think about it as operation leads?
Absolutely. So funny enough, when I started thinking about this product, I guess if you want to call it as that, or this idea, maybe even at the time, I found this guy, which is a researcher called Kurtz, and he became super well known now for writing a bunch of publications on protocol amendments. And fundamentally, his belief or his conclusions of the research is, let's say, three things. One is that according to the own author of amendments, 85% of amendments are avoidable after math. So in retrospective, right? So for me, that was telling me that, hey, we could have done a better job, right? That was my conclusion when I read that. And at about 14% are what they call scientific paradigm shifts, right? So things that you couldn't scientifically know, that's why you're doing a study. So really those 14% should be the unavoidable amendments, right? So let's focus on these 85%. From the 85%, Paris categorizes them in two. One hand is 45%, which are human error led, and the other 40%, which are just poor study design that has led you to have either the wrong sites or not enough sites, which then lead you to make amendments to increase sites. So about 40% of total amendments are just done because you need to increase the number of sites and you need to change things just for patient recruitment purposes, rather than just traditionally a poor study design approach. So from here, I thought, okay, even if I'm not yet, and at the time initially we weren't, right? Now we are doing it, but at the time we weren't. Even if we are not yet looking at these 40% that are focused on the site selection feasibility piece, just the 45% of human errors, we could train the model to detect all the historical changes, right? So what we started doing was gathering these data sets of protocols that had amendments and training the models to say, hey, this was the original language, this was the reason for the change, and this was the new language of the change, right? And then telling these language models that, hey, I want you to look for similar trends. And eventually what you get is a language model that has been trained a little bit like humans have, but with agnostic disease therapeutic alignment. So what does that mean? That means that if a certain amendment that was done in a respiratory study now becomes relevant for me in oncology, for some reason, it will detect it, right? Which we as humans wouldn't, right? As you know, Naji, because the probability is that the expert in respiratory is not involved in this study in oncology. So you get what I tell to our customers all the time, you will almost get like a medical director that is an expert in all disease types somehow, but not also truly a medical director, right? So, which is really unique because you're flagging things and learning from other disease types or therapeutic areas that you haven't before gotten the ability to. And all of this has been now built on, just about to answer your part of the question, on data, and over 1 million studies now, over 300,000 protocols, and which leads to like about 2 million amendments total that we train this model on.
And you're using publicly available data, like clinicaltrial.org.
Yeah. And then the beautiful piece of it is that the baseline is publicly available data, but then we use about, now I think total is about 40 people in our scientific team to digest and help on the reasoning of that data, right? Because I think, maybe to describe it into other words, if you take the original protocol, the amendment with the reasoning from the amendment submission and then the new language, it's not enough to give enough context to the model to truly understand it. So we use our scientific team to annotate that data set and really add the context to say, hey, this is an injectable product that has to be infused in the patient. And that because the protocol originally didn't have the time of infusion, it has led into the wrong results in some patients. Because of that, we had to change this. This is the reasoning for the change that obviously was in the amendment, and this is the new wording, right? So those context pieces are super important because otherwise the model will just think, hey, I need to know the time of infusion on every protocol, right? And that's not true. Because if there's no product to be injected, then you don't need to know the time of infusion, right?
So you have those scientists and humans actually kind of contextualizing what's in the data itself.
Yeah, indeed.
That's great. And then, like I was thinking, like your other assistant is basically regulatory too, because you were thinking about regulatory strategy from phase 1 to phase 2A, B, like all that we go through. So you have also this part that is already built in. And then you talked about cleanup. So, so if I think like 5 to 10 years ahead, and Biorce and other companies like yours are really successful, What will be the future of clinical trials if you guys succeed in this mission?
I generally believe that the future will be a value-add business more than anything else, right? It would mean that, and if you take another step back here, trials happen due to drug discovery, right? Back in the days, you had a lot of scientists, and I mean, when I say back in the days, you only need to go back 5 years, right? You don't have to go back that long. You had scientists in labs playing around with formulation, eventually coming up with new molecules, and then thinking that this could work for this or for that reason, right? And that would then lead you to have enough animal testing to say, okay, this works. And then now, okay, we want to bring this to humans. So we're going to do it, right? That's fundamentally where trials come from. Today, you have a ton of investment in drug discovery in AI, which means that AI is playing up with the molecules and telling us, hey, there's these 10 molecules you should look at because they are likely to be able to maybe cure this disease or that disease or help you with quality of life, right? What does that mean? That means we had a massive funnel problem because suddenly you had hundreds of molecules coming up with AI, but still we were testing them in the good same old way, right? Which fundamentally was broken. So we needed to change that. So now taking the answer to your question 5 years forward, we should have an operating system that allows you to go from, okay, this is the molecule that this AI is coming up with. I now own these patents because I acquired them or I submitted them, which, by the way, leads to a whole other question whether AI-generated molecules should be patented or not. It's a whole topic right now that I don't even know what my opinion truly is. But regardless, that then allows you to say, okay, this is my molecule. Is it worth my whatever 200 million, 300 million, $500 million investment on the economic front? And then from there, you have a single place that allows you to go from, again, in other words, ideating, designing, planning, executing, and eventually bringing that drug to market in a single place. Probably with about 10% of the workforce you require today, but still with a workforce that is on the value-add business, not on the admin task-based business that we see so much today, which is like a CRA going to a site to do a monitoring visit, for example, right? It's not going to be that anymore. It will be, and using yourself as an example, it will be the experienced clinical development people that will come and say, yes, the AI says this, but my experience and gut feel says that. Now, which one is the prevalent winning decision, right? And then you need to have the corporate governance in the business to say, do we go left or do we go right, right?
Well, that's an inspiring future, and I know we started with your personal story and obviously your dad. And where would you put patient in all this, right? Like I see the efficiency improvement, potentially speed. There's always this question. Yeah, we are discovering much more drugs, but it's always when you bring them to clinic, the speed of enrollment, unfortunately, and all those different steps we just talked about that delay them to be fully available for patients. So where's the patient in all this and what Biorce is doing?
So there's multiple answers to your question, but I'll try to tackle them a bit by bit or angle by angle. So the first thing we understood was that with this, what we now know to call a agentic approach, right, which is these multiple agents, in other words, doing each task. One thing that was completely broken was how we were matching patients. Okay? And I'm not even talking about the human approach anymore. I mean, there's a ton of companies doing patient matching these days with technology. The problem is the cost of the scalability of that. So what I mean by this is, if I have an agent building a protocol, I want them to have the access to say, hey, if I do this inclusion-exclusion criteria, what does that mean for my patient population? And if I tweak it 500 times, which one gives me the best patient population? Right? But for that, I need to be able to query 500 times patient population databases for cheap, right? Because if I'm going to tell you you're going to query 500 times at 1,001 euros one, you're not going to do it anymore, right? The scalability of it is just completely broken. Now, where did we see a problem? And by the way, I'm a numbers almost freak. Like I'm obsessed with data and numbers and mathematics and financials. So I really studied what is the scale we need to get to be able to justify this. And truly, the answer, Naji, weirdly or not, is that below $1 per million patient matches, you could justify this agentic approach. So we started working on an angle, which was, could Biorce develop a patient matching tool that allows you to match at this level of scalability? Because there was no other tool in the world, right? Like if there was one, we would happily plug into that one. But unfortunately, everything else was too expensive. So we thought, okay, let's put a team behind and try to develop this. Recently, I believe first quarter this year, we got $1.2 per million patients. So we're just about to break that barrier of scalability of true scale. So I guess affordable today, but not truly yet on the scalability line that I was referring you to. So we are getting there. And that is where the patient comes in first in Biorce's product today, right? Is this idea of, hey, can we plug into understanding what is the true patient population before I even write my protocol and have it submitted, right? Which is, again, we try to think about this, but we don't have usually enough data to do this live, right? That's the first approach. Eventually, and we're not there yet, but eventually the end goal will be that the patient has, whether you want to call it an app, a platform, whatever way you want to call it, that will continue allowing you to query the protocol, to allow you to have what we call probably COA or EPRO intelligently, right? I think today, and I think you'll agree with me on this, Naji, today we are in a place where this idea of having a fixed, intransigent approach to an ECOA or an EPRO no longer makes sense, right? I should have an intelligent model that I say, hey, this is what I want to figure out. Now go and speak to the patient every day and gather enough data that in 6 months' time, you can tell us whether the patient generally has a better patient-reported outcome or not, right? And that doesn't mean asking the same questions. Sometimes they will be the same. Other times they won't, right? Because you have an intelligent being behind, right? If you ask about a doctor, well, every time the doctor sees the patient, does he ask the same questions? No, right? He's thinking about, what do I see, right? You look better today, right? You look like you're happier. Is that because you feel better? Is that because you're in less pain? Or, hey, you look in a lot more pain today than you did a month ago. Are you feeling not as well? Should I change your medication, right? These are the typical things that intelligently will change how patients are involved in studies, which should also help regulators getting to a place where they see that this data fundamentally is already increasing the patient's quality of life, and so making it easier to allow you to bring this product to market, right? So I think those are the two answers really of today, one already in place and one that will come in place before the end of the year, according to our plans. And obviously the narrative keeps evolving, right? So the patient will be more and more involved, in my opinion, as time evolves. So.
Well, this is great, and so you were talking about it. It seems so obvious, but basically we don't do it, and certainly there's still a road, right? Like when you talk about regulators, like even PROs are sometimes challenging. So as you were talking about it, I'm thinking like, yeah, of course, like adaptive PROs where you can ask like different questions in different ways, and certainly this can help patient outcomes. Especially, I work in cell therapy, and we're seeing and we'll continue to see breakthroughs that are very different in how patients, symptoms, disease is progressing. Like these are transformative way of treating patients. So having different ways also to kind of understand PROs and how patients feel beyond what has been described in the past decades is key. So it's really an incredible journey you guys are on. Pedro, I would love to give you now a word and take whatever comes to mind first. The first one is leadership.
First thing that comes to mind is people, but to be honest, it also comes hard. The second word that comes to mind. So,
tell me more. What's hard about it?
I mean, as you know, like everyone has their unique personality, their unique journey in life, and a true good leader needs to understand that there is no such a thing as a one size fits all, right? You need to adapt and you need to think and be agile enough to understand that while this might work with one person, it will not work with the other person, and you need to be able to lead from the forefront, right? That's why the word "hard" comes in, right? Usually, and if you speak to anyone at Biorce, they'll tell you, like, I never tell anyone something that I can't do myself or that I wouldn't be able to say myself or do myself. So like that usually means that many times you have to go, get hands-on, and I guess, I don't know if we can swear, but knees deep into something that doesn't smell very good, to say, okay, this is how we fix this, right? And now that I've shown you, I can go back and do something else, and you can just keep doing it, right? But many leaders are afraid of getting their hands dirty and rolling up their sleeves, right? So that's why it's hard, because some people get in the high horse and they forget that that's not the reality of leadership at all. So yeah.
What about AI?
The future is the first word that comes to mind. And I guess the other two words is somewhat magic or unexplainable, borderline, right? And that's the beautiful side of it, I guess, as well.
CRO.
Inefficient, slow. I would say, I mean, it's not controversial anymore, but like misaligned incentives. So, yeah.
The last one is spread love in organizations.
I also say the future here, a little bit like AI. And to be honest, I don't think enough businesses understand that with AI technology, if you don't have a great culture, you will not be able to succeed. Because people will be able to decide what they want to do, right? I mean, already today, like if you look at unemployment rate in the US, for example, right? Anyone can get a job borderline almost like from one day to another. So if you're not treating your people well and making sure that they're happy and that they are in the right place in the company, incentivized, motivated, and waking up every day feeling like they are in this mission, then they'll probably leave and they'll go elsewhere where they have that feeling, right? Life is too short to do the wrong thing and get the wrong behavior just for making money purposes, right? So, and I think the AI technology is going to shine a light on this more than ever, right? Because today you could do your own company in a couple of days, right? You can build your own systems. You can do so many other things, right? The question is, why do you choose to work for this company? And, we are very lucky to be in a very strong mission-driven business here. And I think many other industries would like to be like ours, right? To have this level of impact in people's lives. And we need to realize that we are this lucky. So make sure you have a good culture, because otherwise people will definitely leave and join another company, if not other things.
That's powerful, and I certainly believe in that and lead through that. Pedro, any final word of wisdom for leaders listening to us today?
I think that there's maybe two messages to send to leaders today. So on one hand, what we've known as leadership is changing drastically. But equally, more than ever, as leaders, we need to think in an agile fashion and be ready for constant change, right? I say this to my team all the time. Like, hey, I can change my mind in 5 minutes. So don't ever take everything I say as written in stone, right? You're here to think and to help me driving this forward in the right direction. So if you're not able, and you're this like almost tyrant leader that is saying, this is the way, and if what I say is written in stone and ground truth for everything you guys do, then you're in a very short-lived career or business, one or the other, right? You need to really be agile and understanding that you need to almost like embrace change daily, hourly, and expect that things will change all the time. And that's the only way. So yeah, that's the message I would say for everyone.
Well, thank you. Thanks so much for being with me today. It was a great chat.
It was a true pleasure. Thank you, Naji.
Thanks for listening to the show. For more episodes, make sure to subscribe to spreadloveio.com or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Let's inspire change together in healthcare, one story at a time.